I would much rather buy an opinionated stack that's totally pre-integrated with all of the unnecessary features removed, stuff that I can just use out of the box with no additional stuff that gets in the way of me like actually taking advantage of this.
So for the past 10 to 15 years, right, public cloud was taking the world pretty much by storm. We started from very basic websites, auxiliary properties, not mission critical by any chance, right? Now these days, companies are routinely running big data computations, very IO intensive, fast data, near real time for ad services purposes. Is that it? Are we now going to be on public cloud forever? Is this the end of history?
With newer stuff such as AI, like large-scale data processing, the costs are a little bit too prohibitive. It is like there are several reports that have been published over like last couple of years, basically claiming that if you're a SaaS startup, you're basically losing about 30% of your margin on your cloud bill. And that's fundamental because most of the enterprise applications that are emerging today, they're either based on heavy data and large-scale data processing, as well as AI. So all of these things combined are now costing corporations a lot of money that it could have saved them, like passed on to shareholders or expanded their technologies. Instead, they're basically giving it away to AWS, Google, and here.
I find this interesting, not just because public cloud is expensive, we all know it's expensive, right? But more because it's unpredictably expensive. And some people do get fired for overspending the budget because they didn't have visibility in their cloud costs.
Yeah, like cloud is like cable. That's basically the new version of it. Like you think you're gonna pay this much, you end up adding all the packages. And in addition to that, you have this like ultimate chaos and unpredictability because not too many people understand how much they're gonna pay for traffic that crosses the availability zones, egress traffic, or if you're like into data, how much your queries are going to cost you. If you have a lot of data, your single query can cost thousands of dollars. This is like not something people really think about when they design their system.
And we're starting to see some companies moving away from public cloud back on premise. And there is one which was very public and very generous with their data. They've been spending north of $3 million a year, which is astonishing for their size.
$33 million is a huge chunk of change for running your infrastructure. It's just infrastructure. And interestingly, if you read the blogs and their statements, what they're replacing it with is 4 racks of compute. This is like a trivially small environment that you can put in a colo and will cost you very little. It's stunning.
It's more than just compute, right? It's the TCO, it's the talent for sure. Yep. You need to manage that. And we kind of been conditioned for the past few years for sure that it will never be cheaper for you if you're mid-sized to run your own thing than it is to go to one of the hyperscalers.
Well, just like in cloud, private environments can be as complex as you make them to be. By the way, like most of the problems in the cloud are because of the people using the cloud and not like thinking about the implications of the cloud and the involved corresponding costs. Same thing is on-prem. You can build a very expensive environment. You can buy high-end gear from, like premium brands. You can slap VMware on top of this. You can build like, the classical enterprise data center. And your costs are probably going to be high. And you're going to have to hire highly specialized talent to run this stuff. But there is a much better way. Things don't have to be hard.
Tell me more about it, because I thought this problem was solved by now, right? If I want to get a VPC in a box in my data center, there has to be a way to do it, right? Sometimes it feels like we've been having this conversation for the past 10 years, right? Private cloud was always on the horizon, just 1 month out.
Yeah, private cloud is like a horizon, right? It's the imaginary line that you can never reach. This is the challenge. And I think it's the enterprise system vendors that are in part to blame for this. And another part here is just the calcification of the technical debt and how we think about data center and private environments. Specifically, we've been building applications around infrastructure rather than infrastructure around applications. And there are good reasons why, because we've always believed that we need to do virtualization a certain way, we need to control application deployment a certain way, and it all sort of evolved bottoms up rather than top down. And what happened since then is that Kubernetes kind of put it a little bit upside down, because Kubernetes was this way of thinking about consumption of infrastructure from the vantage point of the person who owns application services. And while a lot of people thought that it's sort of like, oh, it's sort of kind of like VMware, like deploys things, but VMware just basically tried to virtualize and miniaturize the infrastructural element and present them as if they were in like physical reality. With Kubernetes, you just basically think about infrastructure as just application resources, and Kubernetes over time has evolved into this de facto infrastructure consumption API or mechanism. And now you design a network around how Kubernetes works, not Kubernetes around how your network works. You build out your compute around like how Kubernetes works. You build the rest of your operational things around like this sort of like cloud native stack that is now like a known entity, a known thing. Observability, debug tools, all of the operational tools, how you integrate various DevOps things like for like rolling out your software on top of that. All this stuff is known now. And there is nothing bespoke or custom or proprietary that needs to be there. And it's like first time in history that it happened. And it's very exciting. And I think for the private environments to be comparable operationally to the public cloud, we now need to embrace these new ways of doing things. So it's the infrastructure that now has to be optimized for the stuff that's running upstairs, not the other way around. It's all about the applications.
I get the feeling that this particular dynamic, infrastructure not being really designed for the applications that people are trying to put on it, and the whole set of IT processes and the notorious ITIL library was really getting in the way of the new applications so much that people actually embrace public cloud, not for economic reasons, but to some extent to political reasons, to circumvent.
Political and totally cultural reasons, because ITIL is poison. ITIL has been poisoning the minds of infrastructure people for a very long time. If you can do it complex, you need to do it more complex. It's like this overarching complexity that like keeps on snowballing. And they keep on defining the new stuff to deal with this new complexity by creating more complexity. Look at the cloud. One of the stunning things about the cloud, I remember when cloud was just like coming to the scene, a lot of people in the networking industry were like, oh, look at the network implementation. There is no layer 2. Who's going to use this? Well, guess what?
Everyone,
right? They consumerize stuff to the point where it's easy. Networking is not hard in the cloud. Like, why should it be hard on premises? Like, this is crazy.
Is it hard on premises?
If you like take like bunch of like Cisco boxes or Arista boxes and you have to like figure out how to do it, you need to now hire CCIE or specialists and whoever knows how to deal with Arista. Then you like buy a load balancer and bunch of Palo Alto firewall, and now we have to like operate all this stuff together. That's not trivial. It requires special talent. Like in the cloud, you don't have to worry about this. And so far, nobody took a sort of like this cloud native UX and hasn't ported it to the off cloud, to the on-prem environment in a way that like really reflects the ease of use and ease of consumption that you get in the cloud. It's stunning.
I can see SaaS companies, right? Technology companies trying to build that in-house, investing the resources into it and achieving the same type of UX with the proprietary platform. But for the mid-size companies and for the enterprises, is there any hope to be able to maintain the same level of physical environment, UX-wise, on-premise environment, but not paying the exorbitant costs they're paying today for public cloud?
Well, you can do it themselves, even if you're a small medium. That requires discipline and requires basically the knowledge of what you need to achieve and what applications you're running. Most of the time, those decisions are driven by vendors. They show up to give you promises, and then you stitch together something that resembles what you wanted, but it's never quite like that. And I think this creates a unique opportunity for a new type of enterprise systems vendors to come in and offer highly consumerized private environments that basically just like turn the button, it comes up and works. And it saves you from the crazy cloud bill. And specifically where it's important, if These environments are heavily optimized for heavy data processing, for AI, and these things like just need to work out of the box. We like keep on get bogged down in like creating this infinitely flexible things that can be combined in infinite number of ways, but customers don't care about that. All they care about is like, I have data, I have to like process this data, I have to process it with low latency, low cost, and I need to care about my business because IT is not the end goal, it's an enabler.
So it sounds like a very good fit for those stable workloads like the SaaS company we've been mentioning, right? Which doesn't really go up and down over the course of a year. If you are, say, an e-commerce business, your workload may fluctuate as much as 50x on Black Friday, on Cyber Monday, right? So for the enterprises, they're still going to have this dual world, if you will, when they're going to use public cloud for some things, private environments for others. For the CIOs who are right now trying to either plan out this transition or already in transition to public cloud, are there certain workloads you would recommend keeping on-premise as long as possible and building out specialized environments which are dealing just with that?
Anything that deals with large volumes of data, you better keep on-prem.
It's cheaper.
It's just cheaper, and then you own this data. You don't pass it to Amazon or whatever the cloud that you're using, because once you pass the data into the cloud, there is no way back. Like putting things in the cloud is easy. Extracting it back is actually a very costly thing. Or try to copy it. Like your egress bill is going to be crazy. Like you just can't do that. So keeping those things on-prem is probably the right thing if you figure out the right architecture that's cost effective. And keeping all of the web stuff, the stuff that needs like this extreme elasticity and being able to keep up with demand and keep up with like seasonal changes in business, keep those in the cloud. Cloud was built for that. That's why it's called elastic compute. So you can actually go and like expand, contract as much as you want, but stuff that deals with data, stuff that you have in the branches. Like for example, if you decide to do analytics per store, just do them in the store. Put like a little rack, like stick Kubernetes on top of it, put enough automation, make these things ultimately so like they don't have to be attended by specialists. There are tools available for this. It's just somebody needs to put this stuff together so it works like a system.
So I find this really interesting, right? Obviously the front end, the web portion of it, the caching, anything that can benefit from this scaling up and down should be in the cloud. One piece which I believe not everyone understands is that the AI workloads, even though we keep hearing that the more data you feed in, the more training you do, the better they get, that does not necessarily correspond to the compute that they're using. So they don't benefit as much from this burst capacity. They're fairly fixed in the size.
They're very fixed. And there are several phases, right? So there is a training phase that requires like specific types of equipment with heavy use of DPU or GPUs, maybe DPUs because you have like a lot of like copying of data and moving of data around. And those environments, like you don't do learning all the time. However, you do inference all the time. And that's the second thing, right? Second, when you do inference, you usually do inference close to the data sources. And doing inference in the cloud costs you money, a lot of money. And building private infrastructure for specifically dedicated to inference is actually fairly affordable, and like it's a pretty well understood stack, and getting that stack automated is actually not that hard. It's not significantly harder than doing it in the cloud, but you have to have discipline and you have to kind of take this minimalist approach towards infrastructure. You don't build a monster, kind of like what we used to do with the private clouds.
So when you're saying that the inference needs to be done close to the data, right? It's one thing if I have my data in a dense data center or on the cloud already. If I'm dealing with edge use cases, because more often than not, my data is now where the consumer is, I'm dealing with the branches, I'm dealing with stores, or maybe even mobile networks where my consumers are roaming around. Can public cloud help me at all with that?
Not really. I mean, public cloud will happily sell you storage capacity so you can like take data and put it in there, and they will also happily charge you for queries over this data. Like it's really good for them. That's how they make money. However, the value of putting it into a central location is actually not great because you're running inference, and thing with inference, latency matters, and being in proximity to data solves that because you don't have to transport data anywhere. So like what are you doing per store analytics or if you're doing physical security, like processing feeds from camera, or you're like doing some other things like, like looking at like position of cars within the parking lot, determine whether like you're going to anticipate the traffic into your store. Like all those things can be done locally and should be done locally. And it's significantly cheaper than transporting that into a cloud. Again, like, you don't need racks of equipment. You probably need like quarter of a rack to run all of this stuff.
So really, if I want to do AI, if I want to do anything on the edge, I should be thinking twice before putting my stuff into public cloud.
Yes, absolutely. There is no fundamental reason to take the data and give it to the custody of Microsoft or Amazon or Google, or if you're so inclined, like Oracle Cloud or IBM. Like, keep the data close to where you are. Own the data. You might have another location where you archive the data and all of that without putting it in the cloud. It's still going to be cheaper. Just don't buy enterprise class storage. I mean, sorry to enterprise class storage vendors, but dealing with data today is a lot simpler than it was like in the early 2000s. You don't need to buy expensive gear. All you need is just a bunch of servers with a bunch of disks. The rest of it is software, and that stuff works.
If I'm going to follow your recommendations tomorrow and put a little private, not a cloud, but a little piece in my data center and use it for either AI workloads or maybe edge workloads, do I just need to throw Kubernetes on top of a bunch of commodity hardware, hopefully not invest in enterprise class storage? Do I call it a day, or there are pieces which are still missing?
Well, the challenge here is this: like, all of the components and all the pieces are there. The thing that is missing is something that ties those things together seamlessly. So, and again, as we talked about, this is a problem with how system vendors have been thinking about private environments. They never really paid attention to this out-of-the-box experience where, like, I roll in like a little thing, I turn it on, it runs Kubernetes, it has things that I need, it just works. Today, a lot of the stuff is just basically you have like a bunch of puzzle pieces that you need to put together. And that requires tremendous amount of expertise. And you have to have teams, you have to have specialized talent. And this costs money. And talent is not exactly abundant. Like, finding people who know how to do that is hard. So this creates incredible opportunity for somebody to come in and either provide services or provide pre-integrated solutions that just work out of the box. I want to do something at the edge, I want to do something at the branch. I should be able to buy a system that just plugs in, because the rest of the stack is pretty unbespoke. All of the components are standard now, thanks to the open source. So building an opinionated stack is now a reality that pretty much anybody can do it. It's just like nobody does.
If I come to one of the top enterprise software vendors, right, they're going to tell me that their stuff is pre-integrated, it works out of the box, and if I ever need talent to operate it, they're happy to sell me that. How do I really differentiate between the ones who are just trying to sell me a bunch of boxes at another time versus the ones who actually have this piece figured out?
Unfortunately, majority of vendors will say that they have qualified designs, and that means that they'll tell you how to put those things together. You still have to deal with the pieces, and they will upsell you on pretty expensive service contract to put this stuff together. So what you're going to get is not something that's out of the box. They'll try to sell you a lot of customization. They'll try to upsell you on a lot of the stuff that you don't need because it's in their values. One of my previous employers was like notorious for that, because they needed to have specific value, even if it's like a piece of open source software that needs to run on this. They needed to insert something that customers never really asked for, but they still wanted to sell you because that's how they provide value. And I think time for that is over.
All of that optionality which is built in is not free, right? Should I be looking for someone who has fewer features and more opinionated approach to infrastructure?
Opinionated is great because it probably removes a number of moving parts that would otherwise cause excessive complexity. It will also likely that it's optimized for a very specific set of use cases. And if this maps into the use cases that you have as a consumer of this technology, then it's great. Obviously, if it doesn't meet your use case requirements, it's not going to work. This is kind of common sense. I would much rather buy an opinionated stack that's totally pre-integrated with all of the unnecessary features removed, stuff that I can just use out of the box, with no additional stuff that gets in the way of me like actually taking advantage of this. This saves me from like this open-ended problem of paying consulting dollars for something that's completely open-ended or hiring my own teams. And that just like money pit.
Mike, thank you so much for coming in. Love the conversation. Hopefully see you more on the dynamic talks. Please come in.
Oh, thank you. This was pleasure. Fun talks. I'm glad that you care about the subject I hold dear to my heart. Thank you.